He was putting on his jacket when I told him I couldn't feel my left leg. Not in a dramatic way. Not crying, not grabbing his arm. I just said it quietly, almost like I was mentioning the weather. My left leg had gone numb from sitting in the hospital chair for 6 hours, and when I tried to stand to use the bathroom, I had to hold the IV pole just to keep from falling. I said, "I can't feel my leg," and he looked up from buttoning his cuffs, glanced at me for maybe 2 seconds and said, "You've been lying in bed all week, that's probably why." Then he picked up his car keys. My car keys. The ones to the Audi I bought 2 years before I ever met him. I had been in that hospital for 9 days. 9 days after a ruptured appendix that my surgeon described, with the particular bluntness that good doctors have, as another 6 hours, and we would have been having a very different conversation. I had emergency surgery on a Tuesday night. My husband, I'll call him what he was, got the call while he was at a client dinner and finished his meal before driving to the hospital. I know because he told me. He said it like it was practical. There was nothing I could do from the parking lot, so I finished my food. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. My father built a regional logistics company from a single truck and 40 years of early mornings, and the summer I turned 24, he brought me in to run operations. By the time I met my husband, I owned 32% of that company outright, had a condo in Raleigh that I'd paid cash for, and a savings account that would have made most people my age feel lightheaded. His name was Kevin. He was 37. Handsome in a way that photographs, well, and he had a talent I didn't recognize until it was almost too late. He was extraordinary at making you feel like the most important person in the room, right up until the moment he needed to be somewhere else. We got married in October, 2 years after we met. My father walked me down the aisle. He shook Kevin's hand at the reception and said quietly, close enough that only Kevin could hear, "She is the best thing I have ever done. I need you to know that." Kevin laughed and said, "I know, sir, I know." My father didn't laugh back. He just nodded and walked away. I thought about that moment a lot later. The appendix ruptured on day 11 of what was supposed to be a normal work week. I had been ignoring a pain in my lower right side for almost 3 days because I had a board meeting on Friday and I kept thinking it was stress. By Tuesday morning, I couldn't stand straight. By Tuesday afternoon, my assistant, who is 23 years old and apparently more medically literate than I am, took one look at me across the conference room table and said, "Claire, I'm driving you to the hospital right now." She probably saved my life. Kevin finished his salmon. The surgery was 4 hours. I woke up in the ICU with a drain in my side and a nurse named Patrice. No, wait, that name's taken. A nurse whose name I never caught properly because everything was still blurred from anesthesia, who told me the surgeon would come explain everything in the morning. My father was in the waiting room. He had driven 3 hours from Greensboro the moment my assistant called him. He was asleep in a chair when I was brought out of recovery, and when a nurse gently shook him awake, he stood up so fast he knocked his coffee cup off the armrest. Kevin came the next morning, around 10. He brought flowers, the gas station kind, still in the cellophane, and he sat with me for about 40 minutes before he said he had to get back for an afternoon call. Over the 9 days I was there, he visited 4 times. Each visit was under an hour. He sent me a DoorDash order of soup once, which I appreciated until I realized he'd used my credit card to do it. On the morning of day 9, the surgeon cleared me to go home. She gave me a list of restrictions: no driving for 3 weeks, limited lifting, follow-up in 7 days, and a prescription for the infection that had spread before surgery. I called Kevin from my hospital room and told him I was being discharged at 2 o'clock. He said, "Oh good, hey, listen, my parents are in town. They flew in this morning and I kind of already told them I'd take them to Heron's tonight. You know how Dad is about that place. Can you grab an Uber?" Heron's is a restaurant in Durham. It has a James Beard-nominated chef and a 3-month reservation waitlist. It is 45 minutes from the hospital." I sat there holding the phone for a moment. I thought maybe I had misunderstood. I said, "Kevin, I'm being discharged from the hospital. I had a ruptured appendix. I have a drain in my side." He said, I know, but you said the doctor cleared you, so you're okay to travel, right? And honestly, it's just dinner, babe. They flew all the way here." "They flew here to see you," I said, "not to celebrate me leaving the hospital." "I can't cancel last minute. The reservation." "Use my car," I said, and I don't know why I said that. Maybe I was still foggy. Maybe I was testing something. "Oh yeah, actually, would you mind? Mine's making that noise again and I don't want to take it on the highway. I'll leave it in the garage for you." He left his 2019 Civic with a check engine light for me to use whenever I felt well enough to drive. He took my Audi Q5 to a 4-star restaurant with his parents while I waited in a hospital discharge lounge, 9 days post-surgery, one hand on my side, trying to figure out if an Uber was going to charge me surge pricing at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday. The nurse who wheeled me to the curb looked at the Uber app on my phone, looked at me, and said, "Is someone coming for you, honey?" I said, yes, someone is. I wasn't sure if I meant it. My father picked up on the second ring. I didn't plan what I was going to say. I had told myself I wasn't going to call him, that I was a grown woman, that I could get home on my own, that making Kevin the villain in a story my father would remember forever wasn't something I wanted to do. I had rehearsed being reasonable. I had told myself, it's just dinner. It's just one night. He's thoughtless, not cruel. But when he answered and said, "Claire Bear," the way he has said it since I was 4 years old, something in me just came apart. I didn't sob. I'm not a sobber, but my voice went very quiet and very flat, and I said, "Dad." Kevin took my car to a dinner with his parents. I'm sitting outside the hospital in a wheelchair. I have a drain in my side. I don't know what to do. There was a pause, not a long one, maybe 3 seconds. Then my father said, "Don't move. I'll be there in an hour and 45 minutes. He made it in an hour and 20. He didn't say much on the drive home. He had brought a pillow for me to press against my side on the highway and a thermos of the chicken broth my stepmother makes when anyone in our family is sick, and he had the seat already reclined to the angle that would hurt the least. He'd clearly called my doctor before leaving because he knew exactly what questions to ask the discharge nurse, and he'd already picked up my prescription from the pharmacy closest to my condo because he'd called ahead to confirm they had it in stock. When we got home and he helped me to the couch, he sat across from me in the armchair and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long has it been like this?" I said, "Like what?" He looked at me with the expression he uses when he is trying very hard to be patient. I said, "It's not always like this." He said, "Okay. It was just bad timing with his parents?" "Claire." He said it gently. "His parents were there, in town. You were in the hospital for 9 days. He visited 4 times. I know because I called to check." I didn't ask him how he knew about the visits. My father has always been quietly, efficiently aware of things. "I just want to make sure you're okay," he said. "That's all. You rest? We'll talk when you're stronger." Kevin came home around 11. He was in a good mood, smelling like wine and the kind of restaurant where the bread comes warm and costs nothing because everything else costs everything. He looked surprised to see my father sitting in our living room. "Oh, hey, Ed, I didn't know you were coming." My father said, "She called me from the discharge curb." Kevin's expression shifted through several things quickly before settling on apologetic. "Yeah, I feel terrible about that. The reservation was just such a pain to get, and I figured she'd be fine." "She had a drain in her side," my father said. Not loudly, not aggressively, just as a fact, in the same tone you'd state a posted speed limit. Kevin said, I know, I'm going to make it up to her. My father nodded slowly, the way he does when he's decided something and is no longer particularly interested in debate. He said goodnight to me, told me to call him in the morning, and left. Kevin was attentive for about a week. He brought me tea and adjusted the pillows and apologized twice in the specific way he had, never quite directly, never quite owning the full shape of the thing. I know that wasn't ideal, he said once. I just have a hard time with hospitals, I think. As if his discomfort with the setting was the relevant variable. I was mostly quiet. I was also, without fully admitting it to myself, paying attention. What I noticed, lying there on the couch in the second and third week of my recovery, is that I had been paying attention for a while. The business trip that ran 4 days longer than scheduled and produced no receipts I could verify. The Friday nights that started happening more often, always with the same loose explanation. Work thing, drinks with the team, nothing interesting. The way he used my Amex for things I didn't question because I trusted him, because we were married, because that's what married people do. My father's company has a legal team. They do mostly contract work, nothing dramatic, but the lead attorney, a woman named Frances, who has worked with him for 15 years and who once described herself to me as professionally suspicious as a lifestyle choice, had apparently been suspicious for a while too. I didn't know this until my father called me on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after I came home from the hospital. He said, I want to come by this afternoon, just you and me. Is Kevin home? He wasn't. Kevin was at work, supposedly, though I had noticed his lunches were running longer lately. My father came with Frances. She had a folder. I will not pretend I was completely unprepared. Somewhere in the quiet of my recovery, I had started sleeping with my phone face down and checking the credit card statements more carefully than I used to. But seeing it laid out in a folder on my own kitchen table, organized, documented, printed, was different from the vague unease I'd been carrying. Kevin had been using my Amex, which he was an authorized user on for travel and joint expenses, to charge things that had nothing to do with either. Over 14 months, Frances had identified $31,400 in charges that were inconsistent with any business or household expense. Hotel stays on nights he said he was local, restaurant bills for 2 that coincided with those mysteriously long Fridays, 2 cash advances from a connected account that I had not authorized. There was more. He had, on 2 occasions, signed documents using a version of my signature on contracts related to a side business venture I had no knowledge of. Frances said the words, potential wire fraud, in the same mild tone she might use to say, potential rain on Tuesday. Potential rain on Tuesday. I sat very still for a long time after she finished. My father waited. He did not say, I told you so. He did not offer an opinion. He sat across from me with his hands folded on the table and waited for me to speak. I said, what do I do? He said, that's up to you. We'll support whatever you decide. I said, if I do nothing. Frances said, the exposure continues and potentially grows. I said, and if I stopped, started again, if I want to end it. Frances said, then we move carefully, and we move first, and we make sure you're protected before he knows anything is happening. My father looked at me. I said, I want to end it. What happened over the next 10 days happened with the efficiency of people who have planned things for a living. Frances filed the initial separation paperwork, our prenuptial agreement, which Kevin had signed without much pushback 3 years ago, and which he had perhaps not read as carefully as he should have, was explicit on the matter of separate property. The condo was mine. The Audi was mine, titled in my name. My stake in my father's company was mine, protected behind a family trust structure that Frances had insisted on years before Kevin ever appeared. What Kevin was entitled to was essentially the furniture he had brought into the marriage, his own bank accounts, and his car with the check engine light. The morning the paperwork was filed, Frances sent a registered letter to Kevin's office. She sent a second letter to the bank, where his side business held an account, flagging the signature irregularities for their compliance department. She did not do this vindictively. She did it the way she does everything, methodically, as a matter of protecting her client. I was at my stepmother's house in Greensboro when Kevin got the letters. I had driven up the night before, slowly, carefully, my first real drive since the surgery, because I did not want to be in Raleigh for that part. He called me 7 times between 9 and 11 in the morning. I did not answer. My father sat in the garden with me and we drank coffee and talked about a new contract the company had just landed in Charlotte, and he told me a story about the first truck he ever drove professionally, which had a heater that only worked if you banged the dashboard in a specific spot, and I laughed for the first time in what felt like a very long time. Kevin's attorney reached out to Frances that afternoon. The conversation was apparently brief. When she called to update me, Frances said only, "He understands the situation." There was no dramatic confrontation. There was no screaming match in the kitchen or tearful admission at the door. Kevin vacated the condo in a weekend while I was still in Greensboro and left his key on the counter. He took his things and the Civic and left a potted succulent on the windowsill that I'm not sure was meant as a message or just an oversight. I kept the succulent. It seemed unfair to punish the plant. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. Kevin's attorney negotiated away from the fraud exposure in exchange for a clean separation, no claims against my assets, no contest on the prenup. Frances described the settlement as structurally straightforward. I described it as the most expensive lesson in the phrase, "pay attention." I went back to work full-time in April, 6 weeks after surgery. 2 weeks earlier than my doctor recommended and 2 weeks later than I wanted. The company had a new logistics contract in Charlotte to manage, and I was needed, which felt, honestly, like the best medicine. My assistant, the 23-year-old who drove me to the hospital and probably saved my life, got a raise and a new title. She has not said, "I told you so," even once, which makes her a better person than most. My father never gloated. He never said anything about Kevin that wasn't completely factual. He did not call him names or editorialize or offer the long retrospective speeches that the situation might have invited. He just showed up when I called him from a discharge curb with a pillow and chicken broth and a prescription already filled and drove an hour and 20 minutes in a direction he had probably been ready to travel for a while. At Christmas, sitting in my stepmother's living room with her coffee and the particular chaos of my 3 younger step-siblings, my father came and sat next to me on the couch. He was holding his mug with both hands. He looked at me for a moment and then looked away, out the window at the cold December yard. He said, "You doing all right?" I said, "Yeah, Dad, I actually am." He nodded, took a sip of his coffee. "Good," he said. "That's all I need. The Audi still drives perfectly. I have the only key." I keep coming back to the pillow. The fact that my father thought to bring a pillow, something to press against my incision on the highway, before he even pulled out of his driveway, tells you everything about the difference between the 2 men in my life at that point. Kevin brought gas station flowers and left after 40 minutes. My father drove an hour and 20 with a thermos of broth and a prescription already filled and a pillow for my side. I'm not sure I understood in those 9 days how much I had normalized. That's the part that's hardest to say out loud. It wasn't that Kevin was a monster who revealed himself all at once. It was quieter than that. It was 100 small moments where I told myself it wasn't that bad, where I made excuses that were technically plausible, where I chose the version of the story that let me keep my peace. He finished his dinner before coming to the hospital because there was nothing he could do from the parking lot. He visited 4 times because he was busy. He took the car because the reservation was hard to get. Each thing had an explanation. The explanations were all true and none of them were the point. What I've learned, and I mean really learned, not just nodded at, is that your character isn't what you do when things are easy. It's what you do when the person next to you is in a wheelchair outside a hospital, holding their side, trying to figure out if surge pricing applies at 2 in the afternoon. Kevin failed that test, not because he was evil, because he simply didn't think I was the priority. And a person who doesn't think you're the priority will find 1,000 reasonable ways to prove it over and over until you're the one apologizing for noticing. The intelligence part took me longer to accept. I had the prenup. I had the trust structure. I had Francis. But I had also given Kevin an Amex card and not looked at the statements carefully for over a year, because looking carefully felt like distrust, and I confused trust with inattention. Paying attention to the people in your life isn't cynicism, it's respect for yourself, for the reality of who they're actually showing you. My father has always known the difference. He called to check how many times Kevin had visited, quietly, without telling me, and said nothing until he had something real to say. That's not paranoia. That's clear eyes. And the staying power, the getting up anyway, that one I owe partly to my assistant, who is 23 and apparently has better instincts than I did at 31, and partly to my father sitting in a hospital garden in December talking about a truck with a broken heater while I laughed for the first time in weeks. Recovery isn't linear and it isn't graceful, and some mornings I drove to work and sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes before I felt ready to go in. But I went in. That matters too. Kevin made choices. Those choices had consequences. So did mine. The ones that let things slide, and eventually the one that didn't. I don't think life is simple enough to call it a clean equation, but I do think that what we tolerate quietly shapes us, and what we refuse shapes us too. And the distance between those two things is where character actually lives. The Audi still drives perfectly. I have the only key, and I've never been more grateful for a car in my life.